Hey there, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Thursday Night Hockey Show tonight. I'm Dave Valente. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls all over the world, thank you for joining us tonight. Whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're at on this side and down here, if you're on TikTok, thank you for joining us. Give us a like, share, subscribe if you're on this side, and if you're on TikTok, hit the screen, give us some likes. Helps boost the algorithm, gets us in front of more people to watch the latest and best in hockey. And it is the best time of the year, almost the best time of the year, as we get close to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And we've got a busy night in hockey coming up. So let's get to it. Tonight, the March 30th games are as follow. All these times are Eastern. So at 7 o'clock, we got Columbus in Boston. Total mismatch, but Columbus has played some teams relatively well lately. And Boston is could clinch the President's Trophy tonight, but it's kind of a fait accompli that they're going to get the President's Trophy unless they just completely collapse the rest of the season. And Carolina, they're really the only team that can catch catch them at this point is to they have to win the rest of the games. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Boston is going to get the President's Trophy tonight, closing out against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Florida's in Montreal. Florida had a stirring win last night, scoring in the final minute to tie it up against the Leafs, then to win it in overtime after Austin Matthews was absolutely robbed on a great individual effort. Um, the Panthers were able to go back down and score on a nice 2-on-1 pass. Brandon Montour getting the game-winning goal there. A playoff preview tonight. New Jersey is hosting the New York Rangers. This could be a first-round preview um, because both teams are second. Well, the Devils are second in the Atlanta in the Metro Division. The Rangers are third, so they would face off, and it would be New Jersey with home ice advantage, which this is what's happening here tonight. The Pittsburgh Penguins are hosting Nashville Predators, a playoff battle between two teams that perhaps you didn't think would be in a playoff battle this late in the season, especially as the trade deadline went. You know that Pittsburgh was going to be competing, but Nashville had really thrown in the towel. But they are still fighting for a playoff spot. Philadelphia and Ottawa in a battle between two teams that will likely miss the playoffs. Washington is in Tampa to round out the 7 o'clock slate of games. At 7:30 is Carolina in Detroit. Carolina is still trying to nail down uh, the Metro Division title. At 8:30, it is St. Louis in Chicago between two Western Conference teams that will be missing the playoffs. LA is going to be in Edmonton. This is a playoff preview, possibly 9 p.m. tonight. Great matchup there. And at 10 p.m., Anaheim is in Seattle. Seattle's got a very soft schedule, rounding out the rest of the season. And at 10:30, the Vegas Gold Knights are hosting the San Jose Sharks. That's tonight's look at what's going on. Games are going from 7 o'clock. Last game goes at 10:30, so we'll have hockey from 7 p.m. until probably 1 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. So enjoy the night in hockey. Let's get you set up for what's to come when it comes to the playoffs because we are just about 2 weeks away from the end of the regular season. Every team in the NHL right now has less than 10 games left in the season. So at most, I think nine. Buffalo and Nashville have 9 games remaining, and as few as six. I think the Islanders have 6 games remaining on the schedule. So it's a very interesting. And thank you so much for the likes. I really appreciate it out there in TikTok lands. That really helps me out. But yeah, so let's take a look at. I wanted to preview what's going down in the NHL. Oh, we got some chat. Hold on just a second. James Savino, one of our regulars on the political show. He doesn't watch sports, but wanted to say hi because I'm on. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, James. But yeah, let's take a look at the playoff picture as it looks right now. Again, less than 10 games left in the season. So let's talk about the Eastern Conference first, and we'll take a look at the Metro playoff race. So in the Metro division, we got three teams that I think the top three teams are pretty solidified that these are going to be the three teams. The question is, where are they going to finish? Canes currently lead. Uh, they're really all three spots are up for grabs as to playoff positioning. The Canes are up 2 points on the Devils and 5 points up on the Rangers. Right now, the Canes have games at Detroit, at Montreal, home games against the Islanders, Ottawa, at Nashville, at Buffalo, at Ottawa, and then rounding out with Detroit. It's kind of a mixed bag on difficulty of schedule. They've got some non-playoff teams. They've got some playoff teams. Uh, but yeah, they need to be playing a little bit better. Most of the teams, the Rangers have been playing really well. They've gotten kind of close to the top position in the division, but the Canes and the Devils have been playing about 500 hockey lately. So the Canes and Devils really need to up their game heading into the playoffs. So can the Canes hold off the Devils? Can the Devils hold off the Rangers? I think that playoff series may depend on who gets home ice advantage. And I think the Devils need to have home ice advantage, even though because it's such a close game that that the arena for the Devils is probably going to be half full with Ranger fans. Um, but yeah, as far as the Devils go, their remaining schedule, they've got 8 games remaining. They're facing the Rangers tonight, of course. Then they go to Chicago and then to Winnipeg. So it's a pretty decent road trip that they got ahead of them. Then they host Pittsburgh and Columbus. Then they're back out on the road to Boston, playing Buffalo at home, and then at Washington to round out their schedule. So they're playing 5 of their 8 remaining games on the road and against pretty decent teams. So you get the Rangers on there. You got Winnipeg, who's still in a playoff position, barely. And we'll get into that in a little bit. We got Boston on the road. That's gonna be a tough one. Pittsburgh still holding on to a playoff position, but then you got some teams that are out of the playoffs. My Sabers are out of the playoffs right now. The Blue Jackets, Chicago. So you got some areas that the Devils can make up some ground if they can get hot again. Their goaltender Vanacek has had a rough run. The sub 900 goals against average in I think the last 20 games. So if he can get right, if the Devils can get right heading into the playoffs, perhaps they can steal that first overall spot from the Canes. The Rangers playing the hottest out of all the teams in the Atlantic Division at the top of the playoff bracket there. They've got 8 games remaining, a lot of road games. 5 out of the final 8 are on the road. Against the Devils tonight, of course. Then they're going to be in Buffalo, in Washington, at St. Louis. Well, then they host Tampa, at St. Louis, at Columbus, and then they round out 2 home games with Buffalo and Toronto. Again, a good mix of playoff teams and non-playoff teams on their schedule. Again, if they continue to play hot, it's very conceivable that they can not only catch the Devils and get home ice in a first round matchup for that in that division, but then they could catch the Canes and then face the seventh overall team, wild card one, in the first round. Um, but the Rangers are getting hot at the right time. So let's talk about the Atlantic now. As I mentioned, the Atlantic, Boston has clinched the division. They should be able to get the President's Trophy tonight, which means they've got home ice advantage as long as they're in the playoffs. So all the way through the Stanley Cup if they make it that far. Um, and it's looking like Toronto is going to be able to hold off Tampa for that number 2 spot. It's not completely set in stone, but Toronto does have the advantage at this point by I think 5 points in the division. Let me see the standings right quick. Yeah, so 98. Well, actually 6 points. So they're up 6 points. They've played 74 games. Uh, the Lightning have played 75 games. So the Tampa has one less game than the Toronto Maple Leafs. And with Toronto having a 6 point lead, the Leafs should hold them off for second point place, getting home ice for that first round, which it didn't work out last year. So it's going to be a rematch of last year's first round playoff series between the Lightning and the Leafs. Lightning won that in 7 games. Continuing Toronto's losing ways in that first round. So, but with the Bruins, they're they can chase history, they can get more points. Um, After tonight, it really doesn't matter what they do. They've got Columbus tonight, Pittsburgh. They're in Pittsburgh. Then they're in St. Louis. Then they host the Maple Leafs, host the Devils. They go to Philadelphia, have Washington. Oh, let me get that. So y'all can see it on this side. Um, they'll have Washington and then Montreal is their final game of the season. Again, it really doesn't matter what Boston does the last 8 games. They're going to win the President's Trophy. They're going to have home ice throughout the playoffs as long as they're in the playoffs. As far as the Leafs go, they have 8 games remaining. Um, and they are against the Ottawa Senators. Go to Ottawa Senators, take on the Detroit Red Wings, the Columbus Blue Jackets, both at home. Go to Boston, play Montreal, are at Florida, and at Tampa, and at the Rangers. So they close on the road 3 straight. Again, 6 point lead with 8 games left, and the Lightning have 7 games remaining. I still give the even with a tough closing schedule there. I give the advantage to the Leafs to get that home ice for that first round series. And then, of course, the Tampa Bay Lightning, as I've mentioned, 7 games remaining. They have it's they got one more game, one more home game. Than they do road games, so they're hosting Washington, hosting the Islanders. Then they go on the road to play the Rangers, then the Islanders, and then up to Ottawa before closing out the season at home against Toronto and Detroit. So it's looking pretty set as far as the top three in the Atlantic go. So I'm not going to anticipate too much movement there. Um, Now let's talk about the wild card in the Eastern Conference. So in rank order, you've got the Islanders who are holding wild card one. You've got the Penguins who are holding wild card two right now. You've got the Panthers that are 1 point behind the Penguins for wild card two. You've got Buffalo who is 5 points behind the Penguins, and then two other teams that are tied with Buffalo at 77 points, the Capitals and the Ottawa Senators. Both of them are. um, I'm counting them in the wild card race because they're right there with Buffalo. But Buffalo has the advantage because they have one more game in hand than the other two teams, and there are issues with the other two teams that I just don't see them overcoming as we get down towards the end of it. But we'll go over their schedules as well. But as far as the Islanders go, they only have 6 games left, but they have stretched out the lead in the wild card race. They have 87 points. The first team outside the wild card is at 81, so they're 6 points up. They have 6 games remaining. The Panthers have 7 games remaining, so only one game in hand for the Panthers. Um, Really, the most realistic idea for the Panthers right now is to catch the Penguins and force them out of the playoffs. But as far as the Islanders go, their remaining schedule goes looks like this: they're at Tampa, then at Carolina. Um, they host Tampa, Philadelphia, then go on the road to Washington and Montreal to close out the season. Um, it's a it's a tough, you get Tampa twice. I'm sure Tampa's going to start ramping up their play to get into playoff mode. You got Carolina, which is going to be a tough game because Carolina's still fighting for playoff positioning. But then you've got Philadelphia, you got Montreal, you got Washington, who may be playing out the string. We don't know if Ovechkin will be playing those last couple of games of the season if they get eliminated. So we'll see what goes on with Washington. But the Islanders have a good chance of making the playoffs. I think they control their own destiny at the very least. Penguins have 8 games remaining, so they do have 2 games in hand over the Islanders. Um, they host Nashville tonight, Boston, Philadelphia. Those 3 games in a row. Then they go on the road to New Jersey, and they kind of alternate the rest of the season. On the road to New Jersey, back home for Minnesota, on the road to Detroit, back home for Chicago, and then on the road to Columbus to wrap up the season. That going back and forth between home and road games may be a little difficult towards the end of the season. I almost at this point favor the Panthers over the Penguins. The Penguins have been having issues. Let's see. I want to hear you Letterkenny style chirp. I maybe Letterkenny. I love it at Letterkenny. Uh, the was it the feds are the real criminals? Is what Squirrely Dan says. That's Squirrely Dan is my spirit animal. I love Squirrely Dan. He's my favorite. Um, but uh, let's take a look at the Penguins remaining. No, I talked about the Penguins remaining schedule. The Sabers remaining schedule. Now, the only reason the Sabers are really left in. I'm sorry, I skipped over the Panthers. Panthers. Let's talk about theirs because they got 7 games left. I think they have the most realistic chance of getting into the playoffs. When you talk about Penguins or Panthers, 7 games left. They're at Montreal, at Columbus. Um, they had that stirring win last night, so we'll see if it carries over to the Montreal game tonight. They have Buffalo at home, Ottawa at home, Washington on the road, Toronto at home, Carolina at home. So they've got 3 games left on the road, but not the top competition. You got Montreal, Columbus, and Washington. Your home games are going to be Buffalo, Ottawa, Toronto, and Carolina. So it's a little tougher at home, especially since Buffalo is much better on the road than they are at home. Much better on the road than they are at home. So we'll see if Buffalo can keep that going. But I think the Panthers do have a favorable schedule compared to the Penguins going down the stretch. And with the Panthers being only 1 point behind, they can sneak into the playoffs. Now, your reward for sneaking in at wild card two is to face the Boston Bruins, and the Bruins have home ice advantage where they've lost like 3 games all season. So, or at least in regulation. So, um, yeah, getting in the playoffs may not be a long stay. My Sabres, their advantage is that they've got 9 games remaining, so 18 total points still out there. Um, but it's a tough schedule. They play the Rangers tomorrow night, then they go to Philadelphia, who Philadelphia for some reason has just beat the crap out of the Sabres this season. Um, like a 5-0 and a 5-2 pair of wins for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Florida Panthers are in Florida. They're in Detroit. They host the Carolina Hurricanes. They go to the Rangers, go to the Devils, face Ottawa at home, and then close with Columbus on the road. Um, uh, you know, 2 things that I give in the in the Sabres' favor. Um, of the 9 games, they've got 6 on the road, and they've been phenomenal on the road this year. Does that help? Coming down, some of these teams like Philadelphia is not going to be fighting for a playoff positioning, but the Florida Panthers are. Carolina's still going to be fighting. Detroit's not going to be fighting. Ottawa may not be fighting when we get down to the game before the last game of the season. And of course, Columbus is trying to uh, win the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, the tank battle. Um, that I think that 5 game losing streak really did them in, and I think losing to Montreal the other night in overtime or in shootout was kind of the death knell of the season. Um, the other thing I'm really excited about is that tomorrow night, Devin Levi, the goalie phenom that all Sabres fans have been waiting to see in net since they made that trade with the Florida Panthers for Sam Reinhart. That's happening tomorrow night, so I'm excited about that. Um, but yeah, it may just be a little bit too little, a little too little, a little too late for the Buffalo Sabres for this season. But try and finish strong. Try and finish in a way that gets you set up for next season. Um, the other wild card teams in the Eastern Conference that you can say are wild card teams just because they're tied with Buffalo at this point. The Senators, they have 8 games left. The problem with the Senators is, are they going to have enough players by the time they get to the end of the season? They are just so injured. Um, they're just dropping like flies. I don't know if they've got 2 healthy goaltenders at this point. So, but they've got Philadelphia, Toronto, at Columbus, at Carolina, at Florida. They are hosting Tampa and Carolina, and then at Buffalo to round out their season. It's a tough road. They've got some good teams on that schedule: Carolina, Tampa, Florida. You know, luckily for them, they're going to be playing Buffalo in Buffalo, where they've been abysmal. But they've got Columbus. They do have Toronto on the schedule, which is going to be a tough game, and Philadelphia. So I don't. Again, I think it's a little too late for the Senators. Um, but just like Buffalo, need to finish the season well to get themselves set up for next season. And hopefully for them, next season is a lot more healthy than this season's been. All right, so let's get out to the Western Conference and take a look at the playoff positioning out there, and let's take a look at the Central Division. So, um, again, most of the divisions are pretty solid as far as the top three teams. We know who the top three teams are going to be. We just don't know exactly which order there are. It's nowhere more than the Central Division because for the entire year, the Dallas Stars um, uh, have led the division. Not by a wide mile, but they just had a consistent lead in the Central Division. But they've finally been caught. Minnesota's been playing out of their minds, even with the loss of Kirill Kaprizov, and they think they're going to get him back for the end of the season. So the Wild are up 3 points on both the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche. Last night, the Wild beat the Avalanche in Denver to give themselves a 3 point lead going into the final games, 7 games of the season for them. So as we see, the Wild have 7 games remaining on the calendar. It's a tough schedule. They've got Vegas twice coming up. So they're in Vegas and they host Vegas in a home and home series. Then they go to Pittsburgh. Um, as far as schedule makers go, I can never figure out why you're playing a non-conference team this late in the season. But the Wild would be in Pittsburgh, come back, play St. Louis, go to Chicago, host Winnipeg, and then finish the season in Nashville. Um, that might be an interesting matchup, just depending on if Nashville can keep hot right now. Same with the Winnipeg one because Winnipeg is also fighting for their playoff lives. But yeah, it's a very tough schedule for the Wild going forward. Um, as far as the Stars go, they have 8 games left, so they have a game in hand on the Wild, and they'll be playing at Arizona, at Colorado, hosting the Nashville Predators, hosting Philadelphia again, another interconference game. Actually, they've got 2 of them on their schedule. They host Philadelphia. They play the Golden Knights in Dallas. Then they go to Detroit. Then down to St. Louis. Then they host St. Louis to end the season. So they got a home and home with the St. Louis Blues to end the season. That should be a good matchup. St. Louis always plays Dallas pretty tough. Um, but yeah, I just don't like the fact that 2 of your final 8 games of the season are against interconference opponents. So, yeah, Philadelphia and Detroit are on the schedule for some reason this late in the year. Um, the Avalanche are also have 8 games left in the season. A little bit easier time for the Avalanche. So they may be able to catch both or pass Dallas and catch the Wild. They play Dallas, so that's going to be a big game. Um, then they have a home and home, or I'm sorry, they got 2 road games against the San Jose Sharks. It's a really weird quirk of the schedule. You don't generally see 2 consecutive road games at the same team. Then they go down to LA to play the Kings, which would be a tough game. But then they go to Anaheim, who's in the Connor Bedard battle, taking on Winnipeg, which may be an interesting one in the Western Conference um, as far as overall playoff positioning for both teams. Then they've got Winnipeg, who's fighting for playoff lives, and at Nashville. So, uh, both the it looks like both the Wild and the Avalanche end their season at uh, in Winnipeg, hosting Winnipeg, and then going to Nashville. That's an interesting schedule for the Avalanche and the Wild. Um, let's take a look at the Pacific Division. So, almost congratulations to Jack Eichel. He is going to make his first playoff appearance. Oh my goodness, we got Tom, man. Careful what you say about the Islanders. I think the Islanders make it. I mean, unless you're worried. Panthers, true, they have no goaltending. Um, did you see Paul Maurice lose his shit on the team last night, though? That was pretty interesting. Um, Penn's blue line is in tatters. I don't disagree with that. Um, Puck the Rangers. I don't disagree with that. Although I did predict the Rangers to win the Stanley Cup this year. So, um, and I'm betting the Bruins lose in the first round in reverse psychology. Dan Fishman. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I thought that was Tom saying it. Dan, I would not be surprised, man, if they lose in the first round. I would be shocked if they lose in the first round. There's no way that they should be losing a first round game, because their pickings are Pittsburgh, the Panthers, or Buffalo, and they've roped Buffalo every time they played them this year. I think Buffalo got them once in overtime. But thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. I've been blessed. I picked the Rangers because they had such a good end of the season last year, and I think they only improved themselves. Now, they didn't play real stellar in the beginning of the season, and that's why I had them, um, yeah, off of their play last season. That's why I had them up there. Um, I don't know. I think they added too much at the trade deadline, so I don't know that they're going to compete all that well. I think teams that add way too much and way too much star power at the trade deadline tend not to play well. Like when the Rangers added Mark Messier, he didn't win that first year. He was in the Big Apple. It was his second year in New York when he won the Stanley Cup. So, um, maybe if Patrick Kane signs next season, um, Ilya Sorokin beating the Bruins in the first round. Conceivable. I just don't think that the Islanders have enough scoring to be able to get past Boston. I don't think that they have the scoring to get past Linus Olmark. Um, Bo Horvat's been kind of a no-show lately, and maybe they get Matt Barzal back before the playoffs. But I don't know. They just need they need something else. They need another line to score for them, if they're going to advance past the Bruins. But hey, Jesper, thanks for watching tonight. Appreciate you dropping in. Let's take a look at the. We were going to take a look at the Pacific Division. All right. So the Vegas Golden Knights. I was going to say congratulations to the Vegas Golden Knights. They're on the cusp of being the first team in the Western Conference to clinch a playoff position. No team in the Western Conference yet has clinched a playoff position. The Golden Knights have 8 games remaining. They don't even have to win to get in the playoffs at this point. I think it's just a loss by either Calgary or Calgary. I think is the closest team outside the playoffs to the Golden Knights. Calgary has to win out, and the Vegas just has to collapse the rest of the way. And I don't anticipate that happening because they have 8 games remaining. They have the San Jose Sharks, who are pathetic. Then they got a home and home with Minnesota. That's going to be an interesting series there. I think that's a good. It's going to get the playoff juices flowing for them. Then they go to Nashville. Then they host the LA Kings, another good matchup. Then they have Dallas or they go to Dallas, and then they have a home and home with the Seattle Kraken to wrap up the season. So the debutantes play each other here to wrap up the end of the season. Um, I anticipate the Golden Knights getting at least 1 point out of those 8 games to qualify for the playoffs, and also anticipate the Calgary Flames losing at least a point here between now and the playoffs to get the Golden Knights into the playoffs. Congratulations to Jack Eichel. It will be your first time in the playoffs as a NHL player. Don't blow it. That's all I got to say. Um, Now let's talk about the wild card. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go with the other teams' schedules. So the Kings have 8 games remaining. Now the Pacific Division again is hardly settled. Golden Knights lead by two points with 8 games remaining over the Kings, and I think they are 5 points over the 3 points over the Oilers with 7 games remaining. The Oilers have been incredibly hot coming down the streak. Of course, you've got Connor McDavid and you've got Leon Draisaitl. Um, that's you can't fault that. That's some top team action there. And they're both hitting their strides. And don't sleep on Ryan Nugent Hopkins, who's about to hit his first 100-point season as a professional. His oh, Tom doubling down. You going to Vegas, Tom? You gonna put that on Vegas? I think the Bruins could win the first round. I would hope that the after the season they've had, I would hope. I mean, look, I don't like the Bruins. If they lost the first round, I would laugh all day long. But um, I would hope after the season they've had, this is kind of like one of those once in a generation seasons. Um, I would hope that they don't flame out in the first round. That would just be an absolute waste. That would be much worse than when Tampa won the President's Trophy and flamed out against the Blue Jackets in the first round. So let's take a look at the Western Conference wildcards. Fewer teams in the Western Conference wildcard at this point. You've got the two teams that are holding the wildcard positions. Wildcard one is held by the Kraken. I believe the Kraken, let me just double check here. Kraken are at 88 points. And of course, they have 9 games remaining. So they got with Nashville and the Sabres have the most games remaining in the season. The Winnipeg Jets are barely holding on. They're at 85 points. They're 2 points up on the Calgary Flames at 83 points, but not looking good. They're 500 over the last 10. They've lost 2 in a row. Their coach was calling them out the other day. Rick Bonus was calling out, like is saying basically his top players were not giving it up. He had some players giving more than they should be, and some of his top players that had more to give were not giving it. And so that's always interesting comments coming into the playoffs. You don't want to, you want to be playing your best hockey going into the playoffs. Um, and then Calgary's uh, 2 points behind, and the Nashville Predators. This team was dead and buried at the trade deadline. Like nobody thought that the Nashville Predators would be sticking around the playoff race at the trade deadline. Like March 3rd, everybody was like, well, we'll declare Nashville one of the winners of the trade deadline because they got so much back off of Tanner Jeannot and off of I can't remember the defenseman's name, but they got a ton off of him. They got Rasmus Asplund off the Sabres. Not a big trade, but that's I'll call that one out as well. Um, but they're at 82 points, so they're 1 point behind Calgary. And of course, the thing with Nashville, as we mentioned, they've got 9 games left in the season, so they've got games in hand over both the Jets, 2 games in hand over the Jets, 2 games in hand over the Flames. So if Nashville takes care of its business, they should be home and clear. They could sneak right into that last playoff spot like they did last season. It wasn't an enjoyable stay for them because they got ran right out of the building by the eventual Stanley Cup champions. But hey, that's you got to the dance, um, and you got a lot of assets off of your trades this year that are just going to set you up for future seasons. You're actually seeing what these young guys like Luke Evangelista and Philip Tomasino can do. I know Travis Rednick is loving the idea that Philip Tomasino is really starting to come into his own. So, um, yeah, let's take a look at the schedule remaining for it. So, I said earlier, Kraken have a it's. I said it was buttery soft. It is a stick of butter in a hot Georgia summer sun soft schedule. Um, Yes, they have LA coming up, but they start off with Anaheim, then they have LA. This game's at home. Then they have Arizona at home. Then they go to Vancouver. Then they have Arizona back at home. Then they play Chicago at home. Then they play Arizona at home again. Then they play home and home with the Vegas Golden Knights. By that point, they should have a good idea that they're going to be in the playoffs or not. Um, if they haven't taken care of business by the time they get through the 3 Arizona, Vancouver, and Anaheim games, um, then they don't deserve the playoffs. So, um, and of course, Vegas, if they've clinched anything, if they clinch the division, they may not be playing their top players that home and home series. So they may even have a chance there. The Winnipeg Jets have 7 games remaining, so they play Detroit, which is not a tough. Well, Detroit's been playing okay recently, but not a tough out. You have the New Jersey Devils, which is going to be a tough game. You've got Calgary, you got Nashville. That Calgary and Winnipeg game, it could be a determinant as to which team is going to move on as far as competitive towards the rest of the playoff season. Then you've got Nashville. So back to back, you've got the 2 teams that are chasing you. Then you have San Jose, which should be a little bit of a respite. But then you got to go to Minnesota, Colorado to finish out the season. That's a tough schedule for the Winnipeg Jets when they're barely holding on as it is. They're going to have to find that next year. They're going to have to get those guys that Rick Bonus doesn't think is giving enough to start giving more. Um, let's see, the Flames. They're going to be at Vancouver, at Anaheim, I'm sorry, hosting Anaheim, hosting Chicago. So that's a good first 3 of those 7 games. They should be able to make up some points there. Then they have that big matchup against Winnipeg in Winnipeg. Then they go to Vancouver. Then they host Nashville and San Jose to end the season. So there's chance to pick up points um, with the Flames 2 points behind. There's a good chance that they could catch the Jets. Can they hold off the Predators with their 9 games remaining? The problem for the Predators is they've got a pretty tough schedule coming up. Tonight they're in Pittsburgh. Always hard to play Pittsburgh in PPG paints. Then they go to St. Louis, or they host St. Louis. Then they go to Dallas. Then they host Vegas, host Carolina. Again, one of these weird uh, interconference games towards the end of the season. Then they host Winnipeg. Then they go to Calgary. Then they play Minnesota and Colorado at home to end the season. So, kind of a murderer's row of a schedule. All but at this point, all but St. Louis are in the playoffs, and Calgary. I'm sorry, Calgary's not in the playoffs, but are ahead of them in the schedule, so or in the standings. So it's a very tough schedule for the Predators. If they make the playoffs based off those 9 games, they've made the playoffs and they're hot going into the playoffs. So you don't have a dominant team in the West like you do in the East. There's a chance that a team that really is catching fire going down into the playoffs could continue in that first round and maybe knock off a first overall seed. So um, that's the Western Conference wild card. My sense is what we're going to see out of the Eastern Conference is you're going to see Boston playing um, Florida in the first round. You're going to see the Rangers and the Devils playing in the first round with Devils having home ice. You're going to have the Carolina Hurricanes hosting the New York Islanders in the first round, and the other matchup would be all the matchups. As the Boston, Rangers, Devils. Yeah, I think I've got all the matchups there, but should be all 4 of them really good series. Now, I think Boston's going to wipe the floor with the Florida Panthers just because of the goaltending issues there. But Florida catches fire as far as scoring goes. That should be incredibly entertaining series. Um, and I know you're saying Sorokin can beat the Bruins, but they may not play the Bruins in the first round. Oh, Anthony DeLugo says, "Go Islanders." Tom, you got a fellow traveler on the hockey universe. Yeah, Sorokin's a good goaltender. I just don't think the Islanders have the scoring it takes to beat the Bruins. Um, but anyway, let's take a look at the in the Western Conference as far as the playoff battles go. There, that's going to be. It's hard to pick because I don't know that with Vegas being the number one team right now, I don't think Vegas is going to end up the number one team in the West. Minnesota is only a point behind them, so Minnesota could overtake them. Any one of those Central teams could overtake Minnesota, Dallas or Colorado. could overtake Minnesota. Colorado could end up first in the West. Um, Edmonton's been on fire. They could catch both Los Angeles and Vegas and take the first spot in the West. So it's hard to predict who's going to be the matchups, but if it finishes as it is today, it would be Minnesota versus Winnipeg. Or I'm sorry, Vegas versus Winnipeg, Minnesota versus Seattle. Um, Dallas would be hosting Colorado, and the Los Angeles Kings would be hosting the Edmonton Oilers. I would give Edmonton the advantage in that series. I would give Colorado the advantage in the Dallas series. Um, Minnesota, I think, just on playoff experience alone, would outlast Seattle, and then Winnipeg. Thanks for showing up. I think they get run out by Vegas, but that's what I'm looking at as far as that's if the playoffs started today. Um, I don't anticipate Winnipeg making the playoffs. I think either Vegas or Nashville catches them. I do think Seattle's got an easy enough schedule that they're going to be in the playoff positioning. They're just a little too far back to catch anybody in the Pacific for the top three. So Seattle's pretty well kind of wedged themselves into that wild card one position. Just as in the East, I think the Islanders have wedged themselves pretty well into that wild card one spot there in the East. So let's take a look at the tank battle. So um, I think early May we're going to be having the I think it's the first game of the second round. We're going to be having the drawing for the NHL draft, the NHL draft lottery, and there are four teams that realistically right now have a chance to get the top chance. Now, this is no by no means if you finish last this year, by no means are you going to get the top overall pick. It's only 18% chance to win the draft lottery as number one. Um, and by number one means number 32. Um, uh, Even if you finish second or third, you're not losing that much as far as percentage wise in a chance to win the tank battle. And fourth still has pretty good odds of, relative to number one, of winning the tank as well. So, winning Bedard. So, um, the four teams are in order: the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have 53 points, they are last right now. Then you have the Chicago Blackhawks, who are at 54 points, 1 point behind, but one more game or one less game played for the Blue Jackets. So the Blue Jackets have a game in hand, which is not a good thing when you're trying to finish last. As far as the other two teams, the Sharks are at 55 points, so they're 2 points behind the Blue Jackets or ahead of the Blue Jackets, depending on perspective. And then you have the Anaheim Ducks who are at 56 points. Um, the Blackhawks, the Sharks, and the Ducks have 8 games left. The Blue Jackets have 9 games remaining. So let's take a look at the Blue Jackets. It's a tough road, but when you're the last place team in the league, every game looks tough. So you got Boston, you've got Florida, you're at Boston, you got Florida and Ottawa at home, you got Toronto on the road, you got New Jersey on the road, you got the Rangers on the road, you got Philadelphia on the road, then you got Pittsburgh and perhaps a Buffalo team that's still trying to get in the playoffs. That's a tough schedule. And when Buffalo last came to Columbus, they dropped a 9 spot on them. So, um, uh, they did get a measure of revenge when they came to Buffalo and won down there, but uh, Buffalo's got a history of scoring in Columbus. The Blackhawks, they have 8 games remaining. Um, a little softer schedule, but soft is not good in this context because you want a tough schedule, teams that are really fighting for playoff position. So you got St. Louis, you got New Jersey who's going to be fighting, you got Calgary who's going to be fighting. That's going to be those are 2 tough games for them. But then you've got Vancouver. Maybe they want to improve their position a little and not play as hard. You got Seattle, who will be fighting for playoff positioning, but pretty much wedged into where they're at. So they won't have to, they may not be running out their top team as they get close to the end of the season, saving up for the playoffs. You got Minnesota, then you're at Pittsburgh. and then you host the Flyers to round out the season. So, some decent playoff teams, but then you also have some chances for teams that are fighting to get playoff or get draft positioning. So, um, then we go to the Sharks, who are at 55 points, 8 games remaining. Very tough schedule remaining for them. They're at Vegas, then they go to the Mullet and play the Arizona Coyotes. Um, Colorado twice at home, but they still play Colorado twice, who will be fighting for first overall in the division or first overall in the conference too. Then they host Winnipeg, fighting for their playoff lives. Calgary playing for their playoff lives, and then at Edmonton, will be playing for playoff positioning. Um, and then the Ducks, 8 games remaining. They've got Seattle, or they're in Seattle. They're in Edmonton. They're in Calgary. Then they host Edmonton. Then they go to the Mullet and play the Coyotes. Then they have Colorado, Vancouver, and LA at home to round out their schedule. I think the Ducks can still catch and be last overall. They're only 4 points out. Is that right? No, 3 points out. So um, these teams are all lined up in a 4 point pattern. They've got 53 points, 54, 55, and 56 points. Any one of these teams could win or lose, depending on your perspective. It's a really interesting race, and of course, the top prize is Connor Bedard, of generational talent. This guy has done. His career is mirrored that of like your Lemieux and your Connor McDavid's and your Gretzky's and all that stuff. That they're these young phenoms that have all the tools right now to step in and play at the NHL level. There's some other playoff talent or top talent in the draft, like Adam Fantilli, who's one of the nominees for the Hobie Baker, which is the top college prize, Player of the Year in college. And there's some other players, overseas players, that will make an impact as well. Maybe not as soon as next season, but there's always players in that draft that will play well above what they get drafted as. Um, yeah, so that is that as far as the playoff and the tank battle go. Um, let's take a look. Got any scores yet? Because we're probably right at, yeah, we're 7-18. Let's see. We've got goals in the Panthers Canadians game. It's 1-1. 15 minutes remaining in the first period. So early scoring. We've got Anton Lundell and S. Farrell. I don't even know who Farrell is for the Canadians. One of these young guys. Eric Holla has scored for the Devils over the Rangers. That holds up. That's a good game for the Devils. Cements their position. They'll actually tie Carolina with in points. But yeah, that's the only score so far. Capitals are in a power play against the Lightning. But all the other scores are, or all the other games are scoreless at this point. Let's take a look at what we got next on the schedule here. 3 stars of the week. Yeah, so our 3 stars of the week start with Victor Arvidsson out of the LA Kings. He had 5 goals, 2 assists, and 7 points in 3 games last week. Really good week for for Arvidsson. The LA Kings are playing good hockey. They're maintaining that second place position in the Pacific Division. Could move up to first if they get hotter towards the end of the season. Nick Suzuki, the Montreal Canadiens, had 2 goals, 6 assists for 8 points in 3 games. Um, Phenomenal week for the young phenom from the Montreal Canadiens, and then Gustafson for the Minnesota Wild. I almost said Golden Gophers. It is college playoffs, but but he was 2-0 last week. He saved 69 of 70 shots in the last week, so I'm going to say nice. And he was at a .96, which I can say almost nice. .96 goals against average for the week in those two games, as Minnesota has found themselves in the first place in the Central Division. Let's talk injuries. So it's a relatively quiet week. Only two announced big injuries. Um, Patrick Laine is out for 2 to 4 weeks for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Not a huge loss if you're a Blue Jackets fan because um, it's roughly he'll be out the rest of the season. He might be able to come back for the last couple games or so. But he was in practice, injured in practice, man. Practice. Got hit by a shot during practice. So yeah, he's out 2 to 4 weeks. And then Josh Anderson has been shut down for the rest of the season for the Habs with a high ankle sprain. So those are the only two injuries, major injuries that percolated over the week. But good news for the Washington Capitals, John Carlson, all-world defenseman for the Caps, has finally returned to the lineup. He was injured the 2 days before Christmas, right at the uh, winter freeze. He was injured in a game. He was hit by a puck up here, and it detached his ear. He had a laceration of his temporal artery. That's why there was so much blood that poured out of him when this happened. He said he was relatively fine, like physically fine. He didn't get a concussion out of the puck hitting him in the head. Um, the reason why they held him out so many games was they had to repair the artery, the temporal artery, and then make sure that his blood pressure was stable as he was healing. They finally got a clearance from the doctor, and he's back. I think he scored a goal in his first game. He's back to doing what he does. So good to see that for John Carlson. He'll be ready for next season. I think it's too late for the Caps, but um, at least one of the best American defensemen out there is back in the game. Let's go with discipline this week. So men behaving badly. Yeah, we had two instances where guys got 1 game suspensions. Blake Lizotte was suspended for 1 game. He's with the LA Kings. He cross-checked the Jets defenseman Adam or Josh Morrissey on Saturday. Did have a meeting with the player safety Department of Player Safety, and got a game suspension for his actions. As did AJ Greer, forward for the Boston Bruins. He was suspended for 1 game for cross-checking Habs forward Mike Hoffman on Thursday. He also had a meeting with the Department of Player Safety and got a 1 game ban. So that is it for men behaving badly and the discipline report. Let's go to the Sabres beat. So, as I mentioned before, I'm excited for tomorrow. One, they're going to be wearing the goat heads. All right, I'm going to say something about the goat heads. I know there are people who love the blue and gold. I love the blue and gold. Blue and gold are my two favorite colors. My high school was blue and gold. My fraternity is blue and gold. Sabres are blue and gold. I love it. It's a great color combination. When the Sabres play at home, they wear their royal jerseys. They suck. I think they're 6-14-3 on home ice in their royal jerseys. When they play in their goat heads, the third jerseys for this season, they're 8-1-1, and for most of those games, they've scored like 6 goals in each of the. I think all but two of the games they've scored 6 goals, and I don't get why they're at home. Home team wears the dark jerseys. Why don't you just stick with the goat head for the rest of the season? Um, Rasmus Dahlin even said when they wear the goat head, they feel a little evil. They play differently when they wear the goat head. Whether the black makes them more and red make them more aggressive, I don't know, but it's working. Go with what's working. Continue to wear the goat head the rest of the season when you're at home. It's only like 3 games left at home, but wear the goat head. Get those 3 wins because your home record is the reason why you're going to miss the playoffs if you miss the playoffs. Absolutely. That record with the royal jersey is why you're going to miss the playoffs. Your road record should be getting you into the playoffs every year. playing that well on the road. But I mentioned earlier that Devin Levi signed for Buffalo. I was going to talk about it last week, but I got strep throat. It was a mess. But I was so happy to see that Devin Levi signed. They've got him into camp. They had some immigration issues and they couldn't get him in to a game. They've been talking about getting him into a game in Buffalo, um, and just weren't able to do it because of the immigration issues. But now they're going to do it on. Oh man, Joe, you're killing me. The Pens? No. Yeah. Anyway, Buffalo gonna start Devin Levi tomorrow night against the New York Rangers. It's a bold move. I do have concerns about putting Devin Levi in. First off, our defense sucks. They played better over the last few games, um, but our defense has sucked all year. Um, as many goals as we've scored, we're giving up more. And um, bringing in a guy off of a college roster and throwing him into the NHL. Now it's worked before. We had Tom Barrasso. We pulled him out of high school and put him in the nets for Buffalo, and he thrived. And it really does depend on the type of player that Devin Levi is. I'll be interested to see how he plays. But if our defense plays like it's played all season and leave guys alone in the slot, um, leave guys so alone on breakaways that My Chemical Romance writes an album about them, that's no good. Even Jesus won't be making those saves. Um, so I'm worried and I'm excited all at the same time to see what Devin Levi does. Because if he is as advertised, that's the one of the things that the Sabres need to do to be a perennial contender. Nail down who your goaltender is going to be. I would love to see a Devin Levi UPL tandem for the next 5 years. Just see how that rolls. Um, but yeah, it's worrying because Rangers are a very potent team. If Buffalo's defense sucks, and all of a sudden you're seeing, Tarasenko and Kane and Zibanejad and the Panarin just rolling in on uncontested shots. It's gonna be a long night for a kid, and that could weigh heavily, especially if because Buffalo's still in it, and if they lose a game badly, they might demoralize the team and they fall out of the race. I don't think people will blame them not making the playoffs on Levi, but he may blame himself. So um, they need to have a plan if things go south, and I don't know that they do. So anyway, I'll be watching tomorrow night. I'm excited to see Devin Levi play. I'm excited to see them rolling in the goat head tomorrow night. Hopefully, the next two home games they'll rock it out as well. But thanks so much for everyone coming on and commenting. Jesper, Tom Mann, Dan Fishman, all y'all, Joe Slosky coming on, Anthony DeLugos coming on to talk about hockey. I really appreciate it. And everybody talked on and gave us likes on TikTok, 1,700 likes. That's a record for me. I appreciate it. It's been a great night to talk hockey. Great night to go watch hockey. So get out there and watch hockey. Forget baseball opening day. Baseball doesn't matter until June when the Stanley Cup is awarded. Watch hockey, be entertained by hockey, and we'll see everyone next week on the Thursday Night Hockey Show.